Starting in 2017, human rights organizations began receiving disturbing reports of Chinese government abuse in its western province of Xinjiang. The world already knew about China's heavy-handed anti-terrorism operations in Muslim-dominated communities of Xinjiang, but what the NGOs were now hearing was something far more dire than previous accounts reported. This report is the narrative of human rights violations in Xinjiang as we understand them in February 2022. The first thing you need to understand about the People's Republic of China is that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has a different conception of human rights than the Western democracies. Some of the discrepancy comes from their socialist politics, and some from the fact that most Asian nations have a more communal socialistic culture than the individualistic Western nations. In China, the government foregrounds the perceived needs of the community over individual wants and needs. Therefore, the CCP favors policies focused mainly on economic growth and national security, with little concern for individual rights and freedoms, thinking them unnecessary and even counterproductive. The nation comes first, the individual second. But of course, it is up to the CCP alone to determine just what constitutes the national interest, because this is a one-party state, with no other political parties allowed to exist, let alone participate in government. This has never been truer than under Xi Jinping, the most autocratic leader of China since the death of Mao Zedong in 1976. While the CCP has clearly made vast strides in technological modernization and economic development, the improvements come at the cost of individual freedoms, as the massacre at Tiananmen Square in 1989 demonstrated. The CCP has decided that democracy and transparency will not be part of its modernization program. As a result, fraud and corruption are rife in China, and authoritarianism and abuse are the norm. This brings us to the topic of Xinjiang. Xinjiang is the largest province of China, situated in the northwest of the country. Slightly smaller than Alaska, it is 1/6 of China's landmass and is home to about 25 million people. It is a wild and arid land, not very good for agriculture, but with abundant reserves of oil and natural gas. One of the salient features of Xinjiang is that it is home to many different ethnic minorities. The biggest ethnic group in China is the Han, who comprise 92% of the population and in fact is the single largest ethnic group in the world. However, Xinjiang, on the border of Central Asia, is home to at least a dozen ethnicities, from Kazakhs to Russians to Tajiks. The largest of the ethnic groups is the Uyghur, who, unlike the Han, are Turkic in origin and mainly Muslim in faith. About 12 million Uyghurs live in Xinjiang. The history of Chinese rule in Xinjiang has been a chaotic one. Xinjiang was nominally conquered by the Qing dynasty in the 18th century, but proved to be a difficult region to rule, with its propensity for independence and rebellion. The Qing dynasty implemented a policy of settler colonization, moving Han Chinese into the province. This began a long process of forced integration of ethnic minorities alongside of economic growth to better exploit the region while stifling any spirit of self-determination. This process continues today. It has resulted in the Uyghurs falling from 90% of the population of Xinjiang to only 40% today. Many Uyghurs complain of discrimination at the hands of the newly arrived Han. Indeed, the Uyghurs occupy the lowest rung of the socioeconomic ladder, leading to ethnic tension. After suffering at the hands of a series of warlords and interventions by the Soviet Union, Xinjiang was finally claimed by the People's Republic of China in 1949. The Soviet Union, fearful of a Chinese move to dominate Central Asia, carried out anti-Chinese propaganda for years, lending moral support to Uyghur separatists. A turning point came in April 1990, when Uyghur militants clashed with Chinese police in the far west of the province. The cause is debated. The Chinese government states that the militants were Muslim fundamentalists who sought an Islamic state in Xinjiang, while Uyghurs claim that it was an uprising against mass immigration of Han into the province and other hated government policies such as forced abortions. Whatever the cause, the CCP put down the riots with force. Since then, Uyghur militants of various stripes have carried out terrorist attacks in Xinjiang and across China in an attempt to force China to grant Xinjiang its independence. The CCP was embarrassed at this evidence of disunity, especially in light of the recent Tiananmen Square protests in 1989, and deeply concerned with the separatist movement, especially after the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991 provided an example to separatists. The CCP reacted strongly with a crackdown in Xinjiang, arresting thousands of suspected militants and limiting civil rights in the province. During the United States War on Terror, in the aftermath of September 11, 2001, the CCP claimed that separatist groups in Xinjiang were linked to Al-Qaeda in an attempt to justify its campaign in the province. A significant link between the Uyghurs and Al-Qaeda is a dubious claim. There may be some connection, but it is just as likely that the CCP was stretching the truth for political gain, in the same way that the US claimed that Saddam Hussein had links to al-Qaeda in order to justify the invasion of Iraq. As it turned out, the worst was yet to come in Xinjiang. In 2017, China officially launched its Belt and Road Initiative, a massive transportation infrastructure project designed to link China with Central Asia and beyond. These trade routes largely follow the paths of the old Silk Roads, and many of them run through Xinjiang. The CCP calculated that increased economic growth, especially in poorer regions such as Xinjiang, would dampen separatist inclinations and bring stability. The dilemma behind this approach is that stability is needed in Xinjiang for the Belt and Road Initiative to function properly. Political instability and violence could shut down the new trade routes. So the CCP decided to enforce stability on Xinjiang, and ethical concerns were not part of their calculus. In early 2017, in conjunction with the Belt and Road Initiative, President Xi Jinping decided to carry out a program of cultural genocide in Xinjiang to convert the ethnic minorities, particularly the Muslim Uyghurs, into obedient servants of the state by erasing their cultural identity and religion. This is a strategy harkening back to Stalinist Russia or Mao's excesses. The idea is not to punish criminals, but to erase an entire ethnic group which has shown a propensity for independence. The CCP is intent on suppressing Islam in Xinjiang, since religion is a social force which can challenge state ideology and hegemony. The government has persecuted Muslims for keeping their religious customs, such as growing a beard, wearing a veil, attending daily prayer, or fasting during Ramadan. These activities are labeled as extremist, meaning the offending person could be arrested under anti-terrorism laws. Even refusing to watch state TV or avoiding alcohol is enough to justify arrest in Xinjiang. The government has even razed mosques to the ground. The communist government has also set up the most intensive surveillance state ever seen, surpassing even Stalinist Russia. Surveillance cameras backed by AI-controlled facial recognition software are ubiquitous, meaning that everyone is tracked whenever outside the home. Security checkpoints are everywhere, and police regularly seize people's mobile phones and search them for suspicious content. Sometimes people are forced to accept government agents living in their houses with them, who then report on everything the family says and does. But the greatest crime the government has committed in Xinjiang is the construction of hundreds of huge internment camps in the province to detain and torture Xinjiang's Muslims. It is estimated that between 1 million and 1.5 million people are detained in these camps. with at least 10% of the province's Uyghur population either having passed through or currently detained. The CCP at first denied the existence of these camps. Then, when that became impossible, it claimed they were voluntary, quote, transformation through education, unquote, centers to help Muslims acculturate to modern China. However, both satellite imagery and publicly available procurement documents for the camps reveal the existence of 25-foot tall concrete walls around the camps, as well as guard towers and electric fencing. You don't need all that if the inmates are voluntary. The few who have managed to escape all tell the same story. Detainees are subjected to various tortures to encourage them to abandon their religions or cultural beliefs. They report forced starvation, sleep deprivation, beatings, and solitary confinement, all coupled with constant verbal abuse. They are forbidden from speaking their native languages, as these are major cultural identifiers. They are forced to speak only Mandarin Chinese or face punishment. They are forced to disavow Islam. They are subjected to political propaganda, forced to sing political songs and chant, "Long live Xi Jinping," or else face punishment. Those who are judged to have been converted into properly loyal subjects of the state are released. Others have died or even committed suicide. Relatives of detainees are not given any information about their loved ones, and anyone who speaks out against this oppression is liable to be detained themselves. As a result, every member of an ethnic minority in Xinjiang lives under a cloud of fear, afraid to even text family members living outside the country, lest they be detained on suspicion of reporting the truth. The CCP does its utmost to keep the crime of Xinjiang secret. It harasses foreign journalists and prevents UN inspectors from entering the country. But China also spreads lies about Xinjiang, for example, by bringing naive foreigners on tours of Potemkin villages in Xinjiang, fake camps full of actors who pretend to be locals who are overjoyed with the communist government. Again, this is another technique from Stalin's era. The CCP is brutal, but hardly original. But how do we know all this? From 2017 to 2019, Amnesty International interviewed over 100 individuals familiar with the situation in Xinjiang, including at least 50 former camp detainees, and corroborated their stories. It also used commercially available satellite imagery and data, which showed the scale of the detainment camps and their security apparatus. They also examined the aforementioned procurement documents, as well as documents leaked to the West by Uyghur activists. Other organizations have conducted their own research and reached the same conclusions. There is no doubt left about Xinjiang, despite the PRC's deception campaign. It is clear that the CCP's program there is aimed at suppressing religion and erasing ethnic minorities as separate communities. It is among the greatest human rights violations in the world today, rivaling the worst excesses of Syria and North Korea. For more information and to learn what you can do about the situation in Xinjiang, check out the links in the description box below. I'll see you next time.